The Parthian Empire was one of the great Persian empires that rose to prominence in the Middle East during antiquity. For 5 centuries, it was a major political entity that toppled one of Alexander's successor states and was capable of matching the strength of Rome's legions more than once. It was a major economic powerhouse. Many impressive cities rose under the Parthian kings as well, and they left us a wonderful numismatic legacy that I believe is criminally underappreciated by Western collectors. Hopefully this video addresses this issue. Let's have a quick overview of how the Parthians rose to prominence, the kind of coins they struck, and of course take a look at some examples. Alright, let's get started. First, let's get some historical context. Let's go to the year 300 BC, before the rise of Parthia. The easternmost conquests of Alexander the Great were unified under the Seleucid Empire, the biggest of his successor states. It was a massive, multi-ethnic empire that since its very beginning had issues keeping control of such a vast territory. The outermost provinces were particularly prone to disturbances and separatist movements. One of these provinces was Parthia. Initially ruled by a Seleucid administrator, this region was invaded in the mid-half of the 3rd century BC by a nomadic tribe called the Parni. Taking advantage of the political turmoil the Seleucid Empire was going through, they took Parthia from the Seleucids. Another kingdom, Bactria, also seceded around the same time. The Seleucids did fight back. They even submitted the Parthians for some time, but the mix between the multiple wars the Seleucids had to fight and the internal struggles for power meant that the Parni prevailed and went on the offensive. Much of the success of the Parni was due to their way of conducting war with horse archers, very well adapted to the flat terrain of the region and highly effective against the heavy shock troops from the Greeks. Their horse archers became a staple of the Parthian war machine throughout their history. The Romans and their heavily armored legionaries, so devastating in their tight formations against other European foes, also struggled against this highly mobile foe, forcing them to completely readapt their strategies when facing the Parthians. Otherwise, they would just be peppered with arrows until no legionary was left standing, which happened more than once. As a result, the Parthians completely routed the Seleucids. In just a century, they reduced the once mighty Greek kingdom into a rump state, conquering a territory that went from the Levant all the way to the Indian subcontinent. They also established a new capital, the city of Ctesiphon, right next to the old Greek capital of Seleucia on the Tigris. It would become one of the great cities of antiquity. This long, continuous stretch of territory allowed the Parthians to establish diplomatic relations with places as remote as China and the growing Roman Republic. Think about how far away these countries were. Thanks to them, the famous Silk Road was established, linking Asia, Europe, and Africa in the first true transcontinental commercial corridor. Obviously, they charged a fee for allowing trade to pass through their territories unharmed. This brought enormous riches to the Parthians, and much of these riches became coins, obviously. Now, when we think about nomadic tribes conquering vast swaths of territory, the Mongols come to mind. That is, the Mongols and their policy of complete and utter genocide of whoever set up the slightest resistance to them. The Parthians, however, demonstrated a much more sensible attitude towards their new subjects. Many Parthian kings added to their titles the name Philhellenos, friends of the Greeks. The vast networks of cities and the prosperity that they generated must have looked magical for these rustic peoples from the steppe. We can see this integration between Parthians and Greeks on their coins. Look here in an example of 2 coins, one Seleucid, one Parthian, both from around the same time. The Parthians must have hired die engravers from these newly acquired Greek cities and their mints because they simply adapted the image on the coins to reflect their own identity. As we'll see soon, their coins they even had Greek legends. And since we're finally entering the topic of coins, it's worth having a look at the monetary standard used by the Parthians. In broad strokes, they basically carried on with what they found. They adopted all of the Greek denominations from the Seleucids. I'm putting on screen now the main silver coins they struck. Drachma, by far the most abundant of their coins, and some very impressive silver tetradrachm, struck in lovely Greek style. There are some less common denominations in silver as well, such as obols or hemidrachma, but these are much rarer, so you as a collector will mostly come across drachma and tetradrachma. There is also a myriad of bronze coins, also struck in Greek standard, but with the image of the new Parthian monarchs. Sadly, the field of Parthian bronzes is still a bit underdeveloped, and we don't know exactly which denominations were struck, so their relation to the silver coins is kinda unknown, but it's likely that they used the standard of the chalcos, a subdivision of the silver obol. A silver drachma was worth 6 obols, and each obol was worth 8 chalkoi. The very smallest bronze coin must have been worth a single chalcos, and bigger coins must have been multiples of the chalkoi, but we just don't know which coin represents which denomination. Now, how about Parthian gold, like this picture we have on screen now? Despite the Seleucids striking gold status early in their history, around the time of the Parthian conquest there are very few instances of them striking gold, and this tendency was continued by the Parthians apparently. Although we can't be certain they never struck gold, it seems like the only Parthian gold staters on the market are modern counterfeits, made with dies based on silver drachma. Maybe in the future we will find Parthian gold pieces and it will force us to rewrite their monetary history? Who knows, but at least for now, the consensus is that they did not strike gold staters. Sadly, these would be spectacular coins. So, enough talk, let's look at some examples of Parthian coins. My collection of Parthian pieces is not big, I've only got 3 coins, but they are a beauty as we can see. So for the first one, we take a look at Mithridates II, the king that expanded the Parthian territories to its largest extent. The Parthians struck coins at a lot of different mints. This example in particular is from the city of Ecbatana, on modern-day Iran, and dated between 123 and 88 BC. Mithridates II is credited with the formal establishment of the Silk Road, as during his reign, he first made contact with the growing power of China to the east and the Roman Republic to the west, sending diplomatic missions to both nations. As we can see in this lovely portrait on the obverse, most certainly made by a Greek engraver due to its realistic style, the Parthian monarch wears a royal diadem, the symbol of kingship, according to the Greeks, instead of the cap worn by the Parthian riders that was featured in the very first Parthian coins. He has this impressive long beard, and his robe is decorated with a series of pellets, likely meant to indicate jewels of some kind. Heading to the reverse, we have a seated Parthian archer inspecting his bow. Notice how the archer is not sitting on a chair. He's sitting over an omphalos, a Greek symbol. This was the navel of the world in Greek mythology, where Apollo would be depicted in many Seleucid coins, indicating this design certainly drew inspiration on earlier Seleucid coins. The legends are, as I mentioned, in Greek, the lingua franca of the newly captured territories. We can read Basileus Megalo, Arsako Epiphanos, translating it, the great king Arsacid the Glorious. Mind you, Arsacid wasn't his name. Arsacid was the name of the very first Parthian king. Subsequent kings would use his name as a title. Like all Roman emperors after the first one, Augustus, used the title Augustus as an indicator they were the emperor. The name sorta like became the title. There's also this challenging thing about Parthian coins. The name of the king himself is not shown on the coins. The dating of the coins and the attribution to a certain king is based on the titles he gave to himself, which are on the legends. We then go to the years 57 to 54 BC. This is a coin struck under Mithridates III. And look how curious, there's no absolute academic consensus if this man ever existed. There are quite a few kings of Parthian history, particularly in times of internal political turmoil, that we aren't really sure existed. It seems like Mithridates III did in fact exist. He's a likely candidate, and he was probably one of the sons of Mithridates II from our previous coin, but we can't be entirely sure. In any case, let's look at this equally beautiful coin from this turbulent part of Parthian history. This particular piece is from a different mint, Kangavar, also in modern-day Iran. The obverse this time shows us this middle-aged man with a shorter beard. It might not be as stylistically beautiful as the first coin, but this is still a portrait of very high quality. Definitely better than the portraits the Romans, for example, were capable of making in their coins by this time. Notice he still wears the royal diadem with some very long strips of fabric falling down his back. He has a considerably shorter beard, and he seems to wear some sort of jeweled amulet on his neck. Now, the reverse of this coin is so busy. There are tons of things to read here. This is typical of rulers who ruled under tumultuous times. Titles were constantly given to their regnal names to give them some sort of legitimacy on their legal documents and ceremonial appearances, and these new titles made their ways to the coins. So at the center we once more have our little archer inspecting his bow, although this time he is sitting on a proper throne. Okay, the legends. Let's break this down. Basileus Basileon, King of Kings, Arsaco Dikaio, Arsacid the Fair, Epiphanos Theo, Glorious God, Jesus, what an ego, Eupatoros Philelenos, of noble birth and friend of the Greeks. It feels like you need to take a deep breath if you want to spell the entirety of the legends in one go. And finally we go to our last coin of the day. We do a big jump in time to the years 147 to 191 AD. So more than 2 centuries after our last coin. Sadly, by the look of this coin compared to the previous ones, we can see the Parthians were not in their golden age anymore. From style to the lower silver content to its weight, we can see a clear decline in the quality of the coin, despite the abundance of these pieces nowadays, indicating that the Parthians still possessed considerable riches, even if by this time they were constantly being defeated by the Romans. The ruler in this coin, Vologeses IV, fought a war against the emperors Marcus Aurelius and Lucius Verus, being pushed back and having to cede territories in Upper Mesopotamia to the Roman Empire. On the obverse, we see the now highly stylized bust of the Parthian king. From the very start of the Parthian nation, we see a slow and steady decline in the realism of the coins compared to the very first pieces. Likely because as the Greek influence over the Parthian elite faded away with the years, no real effort was put on retaining this Greek style of art, reducing on the diminishing of the native Greek population and the decline of the realism on their coinage. Despite all this, we can still make out some parts of the design reminiscent of the earliest Parthian drachma, like the royal diadem and the stripes of fabric falling down the king's back, as well as his typical long beard. On the reverse, we have a complete degeneration of the legends. Some examples from this time still depict at least part of the legends in Pahlavi, a Middle Persian language spoken in the region. Due to the departure of the Parthian elites from the Greek tradition, the Greek language was also abandoned broadly by the population. So for this particular example, what we have here are basically corrupted Greek letters, the imitation of an imitation of an imitation of some previous drachma the die engraver had as a reference, likely made by some illiterate die engraver in fact. The poor little archer in the center of the design has also been molded into a barely recognizable figure. As a result, the entire reverse design almost looks like a bunch of garbled lines, such a sad decline for once beautiful coins. The Parthians would fall not long after the striking of this coin, in 224 AD, Internal fights between the Arsacid monarchy and the Persian factions inside the empire would lead to the next Persian empire, the Sasanians. They also have a unique and interesting numismatic legacy, but this will be a topic for another video. Do you have a Parthian coin? Did you even know they struck such beautiful coins once? Let us know in the comment section down below. I hope you enjoyed this little episode. It's fascinating to explore other civilizations that get out of the Roman and Greek themes I usually discuss. So if you did enjoy, remember to leave a like and consider subscribing. Happy collecting, and I'll see you soon.